So Matthew Barrett recently left the SBC and is now a professor at an Anglican seminary and is attending an Anglican church. Why did people react the way they did when Matthew Barrett disappeared from Baptist life? Maybe it's because it represents the disappearance of something else and potentially the disappearance of an illusion of conviction. We're going to consider the initial disappearance, our potential disappearance, and what will happen if this continues. Examining the reaction to Matthew Barrett. Let's go. Where were you on 7/24? I'll never forget where I was. I was at La Coretta's, enjoying a Dos Equis Baptist,
my friend.
some chips and salsa, and I will never forget that, and neither will you. We'll remember where we were, because it stung. Now, obviously, there are two really low-hanging fruit. One is Matthew Barrett took our SBC money to make a, checks notes, Anglican systematic theology. And I'm sure that there's a case to be made on the other side where he would come and explain himself. But many initially were just like, dude, can you just say you're sorry? He wrote his Substack article after. So they originally caught it and they were like, wait a second, he's teaching well? The second low-hanging fruit is, why would I trust you if you're going to change your mind about what many believe is a pretty basic commitment, like believer's baptism, in the middle of writing this book?
How do you hire someone who 5 minutes ago was a Baptist?
He's been working on the systematic theology, which, is interesting. Is it going to be a Baptist systematic theology? Is it going to be an Anglican systematic
Is Waldman still going to publish it?
Yeah, that's right.
Snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap!
Most anticipated work is still to come. A full systematic theology currently being written for Baker Academic. This will be the first Anglican systematic theology in over 100 years since Francis J. Hall's dogmatic theology.
It strikes me as really odd.
That is a question. Some of this touches on the issue of the question of character. When someone signs on the dotted line and says, this is what I believe, can we trust that they actually believe that?
I want to just be able to trust you. It's about trust.
And most of these people wouldn't actually say that you can't change your mind on some things, right? But they would just probably follow it up with, well, not many of you should become teachers. I actually initially found it pretty jarring how many times I saw praise, unqualified praise, or barely qualified. But others were quicker to poke fun at those who weren't super excited about Matthew Barrett. Some people acted like liberals. You can't judge him! Now, I'm sure that there were some people that were just whining. And look, I poked fun at Barrett and I poked fun at myself. I said Matthew Barrett hurt my feelings, and kind of joined in the fun. And that's how I chalk most of it up to just fun. People were just talking. It got people talking. But I do want to legitimize the criticisms and why so many people seemed to be questioning his move. And while there might have been some that were just being mean, just being judgmental, or just being whiny, I do think that there was a kind of criticism of Matthew Barrett that came from a really sincere place, and it stung. Like, I'm gonna remember this.
I can respect a guy who says my beliefs have shifted and I need to make that known, but this does sting as a Baptist who is confessionally Baptist, who is a Southern Baptist. This is big news.
Where were you on 7/24? And I'm calling it a grieving curiosity. What was going on? And this grieving curiosity came from a place of, what does this mean? What does this mean for him? What does this mean for Baptists? What does it mean for me? Behind the grieving curiosity was this question, did Matthew Barrett really believe what he said he believed all this time? So the disappearance of Barrett introduces a question. Well, who else in this complex of the SBC? That's another layer of the sting. Is like, what does he represent? He represents others that maybe aren't as convictionally Baptist as they should be. under that is another layer, and that is included me. Do I believe? Why do I say that I'm a Baptist? Why do I say that I believe these things? Or maybe there's more opportunity, or maybe I have a rough experience that motivates me to rethink some things, or maybe I'm getting exhausted with the cultural restlessness, and what's stopping me from making that move?
It's time for your next adventure.
I have no idea what I'm going to do tomorrow.
How exciting.
There's a question about being a Reformed Baptist. Did I say this in a Patreon video? Am I Baptist first and Reformed second, or am I Reformed first and Baptist second? But there's another question. Am I Catholic first and evangelical and then Baptist? Now, I mean Catholic in the sense of universal. I don't mean Roman Catholic.
Reclaims the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. What exactly does that mean?
Center for Baptist Renewal has had some stuff to say about this. I've said it multiple times, but I sincerely mean it. I begrudge no one's spiritual journey, even if they become something other than Baptist. What I object to is the notion that you cannot remain Baptist and be committed to Catholicity or retrieval. He's not saying that you can't genuinely decide to go to another tradition. He's just saying that you don't have to go to another tradition in order to be committed to Catholicity or retrieval.
And Founders has been involved in retrieval work before retrieval work became cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we were before the internet. To hear some of our Baptist friends get all nervous about retrieval work is just kind of strange to me.
I remember specifically mentioning, and it wasn't that long ago, it was within the past 2 years, students were hand drawing pictures of Thomas Aquinas and giving them to Matthew Barrett, who is displaying them on the walls of his office. You just need to learn to reclaim the great tradition and all this kind of stuff. And you need to stop being a biblicist. I'm sure that Spurgeon would have just died if someone called him a biblicist.
Oh, brother! That you can do what Barrett says that he wants to do and remain Baptist.
Dr. Barrett, if Catholicity is the core of the Reformation, then what do we do with events such as like Luther at the Diet of Worms?
It gets painted as this Here I Stand speech in which this is Luther, the Enlightenment man, in which Luther is throwing off the shackles of tradition. He's not putting himself in a box as if he alone is the first one to read the Bible. He actually is standing on the authority of Scripture, and he thinks that the fathers, which can be pretty expansive, support him.
This is like a test case for how tethered to history we are, because when we see someone that moves away from a certain Protestant tradition to go to another, it asks, how Catholic are we exactly? So anyway, in the infamous Substack article, Matthew Barrett outlines that he and his family got hit by a storm, and that storm knocked down some pillars. One of the first pillars that fell was the SBC's Executive Committee's rejection of the inclusion of the Nicene Creed into the Baptist Faith and Message.
More complex than that. But the fact that we didn't add the Nicene Creed to the Baptist Faith and Message is not and should not be taken as a rejection of the Nicene Creed. In fact, there was a resolution affirming the Nicene Creed sometime in the last couple of years that the SBC adopted.
But the most controversial thing he said in the article was when he said that God took a sledgehammer to the third pillar, baptism. He said, I don't need to rehearse the arguments for infant baptism here. Go check out Fesco and Waters. But the scales fell off my eyes when I saw for the first time that the Baptist hermeneutic is truly individualistic. It's modern to the bone. It's one thing to say that you genuinely want to go to this other tradition because you believe that it's more biblical. It's another thing to denigrate the tradition that you're leaving from.
Show some respect.
And I think that in part sometimes we feel like we need to do that, kind of like helps us justify why we're leaving. No matter, it doesn't matter. That's just not true. Baptists are evangelical, they are Christian, they are Catholic, they are Orthodox. Well, Michael Haykin had a lot to say about that. He discusses in response to Matthew Barrett's article this idea of Baptists and their relationship to Catholicity. Well, I'll link it in the description below. But he brings up guys like Andrew Fuller, John C. Ryland as eminent examples of the Baptist faith and ethos. But I love how Haykin noted, quote, in our day we are witnessing a fabulous recovery of the theology of these Baptist fathers and mothers of the 17th and 18th centuries, but not this nota of Catholicity in their churchmanship. Do we hear what he just said? in our retrieval of our Reformed Baptist heritage, we're not noticing how they retrieved the Christian tradition from before them. And on this note, I'll just recollect a conversation I once had with a Presbyterian scholar who said that we, referring to Reformed Baptist, just straight stole the Westminster Confession of Faith. To him, I responded, just like the Presbyterians stole from the 39 in Irish articles before them. Boom, roasted. You not only have a confession that points out where the Baptists disagreed with their Presbyterian brothers, but in the unity, you actually have a statement of catholicity that, hey, here's where we differ, but here's where we are united, and here's where we're one. I got the sense from Barrett's article that he wanted something that felt more ordered. Anytime someone is leaving a tradition to go to something they feel like is more ancient or older, I feel like wrapped up in that is a pursuit for order. The reason I'm saying that I felt like this was coming up in the article is because he kept referring to these bad hardship for his family in the SBC. And of course, it feels like chaos and disarray, and you want to leave that to go to something that feels more structured. And that is just part and parcel of our cultural restlessness and desire for law and order. We just want to go to a tradition that feels better structured, better ordered, and in that vein, more biblically ordered, but ordered nonetheless. And when you're dealing with polity, and you're dealing with order, and you're dealing with accountability, and you're dealing with good or bad church structures, you're dealing with how does Christ structure this thing.
Do not tell me it can't be done.
And feels like this one's not structured well, and this one is. Then at that point, if this is true that the Baptists are, as Reformed people, committed to the church being ordered according to the mind of Christ, then the issue wouldn't be that the Baptist faith is out of step with Christianity at its root, in its essence, but that maybe it needs to be better ordered. Because part of this issue is what drove him to make this decision.
What did I do wrong?
Well, we actually can't know that. He gave us some of his reasons, and some of them were compelling, some of them weren't compelling. But what we can do is look at the system that he's going toward and say, what moves that system? So maybe what's pulling him. The Reformed commitment to the regulative principle of worship is rooted in this idea of being committed to the mind of Christ. That it's the mind of Christ and his revelation and his words and his commands and his ordinances. It's his church. He's Lord of the church, so he commands how the church should be structured. Especially when you're dealing with Anglicanism, which is a via media between Protestantism and Catholicism, it kind of gets a little bit murkier when you're talking about that principle. Did the regulative principle of worship draw Matthew Barrett out to Anglicanism? Boom, roasted. When you move away from such a thing that in its root is so committed to the mind of Christ, are you being pulled by heaven and the mind of Christ patterning his church? Or are you being pulled by tradition? And what is the piece in those systems, and these older systems of thought and these older traditions? What's pulling us? And what that question does is it begins to remove a little bit the illusion of our own convictions at a large scale, and teachers included. How many of us, when we see this take place, I think the reason it stings is because we wonder, who else? And am I one of them? If you're a pastor watching this, and if you're at gunpoint, would you die for the secondary doctrine of believers' baptism? Because underneath that principle is that phrase, according to the mind of Christ. God never told us to baptize our babies, so we don't. Would you die for that?
It might not even be worth the trouble.
If this continues, depending on the rate and velocity with which it proceeds and at the scale it develops into, I pray it doesn't, but if it does, we'll see the disappearance of the SBC.
It's gone.
because we're going to continue to see Reformed Baptist evangelical Christians be tempted to leave. Now, some are going to be leaving because they're genuinely convicted and convinced by Scripture, and their conscience is convinced by arguments from that other tradition that that's the more biblical one. And as I've said before on this channel, and I'll say it again, Godspeed. You follow what you believe Scripture teaches. But then there are others that will leave for political reasons. We're seeing this a lot, and I cover a lot of that on this channel. They kind of put theology a little bit second, and they kind of use theology for political purposes, and they choose where they're going to go to church based on some of those issues as well. I'm just saying that's a temptation to leave your tradition because you think it's fake and gay, and you want to go to a non-fake and gay church, so you leave. I think there's a huge percentage of my audience that doesn't fall into the other category, but you might be more tempted to fall into this category where you're going to want to leave for tradition. You see the people that leave to accomplish political purposes and you roll your eyes at that. You're like, that's silly. But you still are part of a culture that is restless and searching for meaning and rootedness. You go and look at those beautiful videos of those beautiful churches, and you think to yourself, and you might not realize it, man, that looks like real worship. And what you're picking up on is reverence. I mean, you're picking up on this attempt at reverence, but you're not enough convinced of the simplicity of the Reformed approach to worship.
One of my early videos was like, the digital is eating the walls of the church, eating the walls of the libraries. I mean, we're just all staring at each other now. We're just straight staring at each other. And the walls have been dissolved by the digital. You don't have to go to a Catholic church, or Orthodox church. You don't have to go to a modern church. You just you can see it. Yeah. You can read about the theology. You can have somebody teach it to you on YouTube. Right. You can have it explained to you on AI. You can have it compared. Yeah. So the question now is, well, this is the meta. Like, well, now what?
What you're seeing is swapping out modern day fog machines for medieval fog machines. I think I stole that from Adam McCarty, my buddy. The digital age has removed the walls of the church so that we can look into other church services and see how other faiths and traditions practice. And it can be really tempting.
Stay here. Stay as long as you can.
But we have to ask ourselves, what do we believe? What do I believe? Because of what I do, I am forced to ask myself this question quite a bit. And I have to ask myself, where did my faith come from? It didn't come from books. It didn't come from tradition primarily. It came right smack dab out of heaven and into this world. A few fishermen that met them, confronted them in their lives, stopped them in their tracks. And the Lord said, take up your cross and follow me. This faith from heaven has come into my life, has stopped me in my tracks, and has said, take up your cross and follow me. And I believe the evangelical faith is heaven's faith. I think what could help us here is spending more time in prayer.
We're waiting, sir.
Waiting for what?
Private Doss to finish praying for us, sir.
And as I do work like this, and I come across a lot of different traditions and political movements, and sometimes things can get pretty vile, and I just always need to stay centered. And one of the ways that I've been trying to do that is actually just to really make my theology and my prayer life intersect. And you want some traditional prayers. Of course, you can read the Book of Common Prayer if you could read the Book of Common Prayer if you want. I think that Matthew Barrett did a whole lot of that. Maybe, dude, go pick up the Valley of Vision. And there is something sweet about reading recorded prayers. But in our attempt to do theological retrieval, keep retrieving your prayer life. Keep retrieving the great tradition or whatever. Remember that you're not necessarily worshiping when your senses are acted upon in the liturgy and you feel as though you're worshiping when you come with faith, not looking at images to make you feel like you're worshiping, but coming to the God you cannot see with your eyes, with his people, and believing that when you meet and worship him according to his commands, he will meet with his people. And thanks Trevor and Tyler for joining our Patreon. Welcome aboard. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And you know what to do. Well, leave it at that. Don't say anything. Don't say stay Baptist.